Right, this is Drawing and Talking with Nathaniel Sullivan. Again, right, my own visage, my own image is here on the screen. Although, yeah, I'm going to be working during those. I draw and I talk during these things, hence the name, Drawing and Talking. Pretty self-explanatory, but there you are. So again, I'm going to be doing a book review this time, book discussion, probably more accurate. Going to be doing Cormac McCarthy, Blood, Meridian, or the Evening Redness in the West. So Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, or the Evening Redness in the West. This is probably going to be broken up into at least two parts, just because there's sort of several things, many kind of things to say. Well, I mean, there's it's a tough book, or it's a complex book. I mean, you could have very very lengthy discussion about it. And by the way, if anyone's interested, that would be great. I mean, I'm always interested in discussing books, so you can let me know in the comments if you'd like to get into more lengthy or more involved discussion of the book. But anyway, one thing I do want to say at the outset, and this isn't really this related to the book, but it was sort of the broader sort of context. One thing I've kind of picked up on, or I think that's kind of happened, or I've kind of seen in literature, is kind of a renaissance. I don't know, renaissance is probably too strong, but the Western has kind of come back. Right, there's some really impressive Westerns that have come out recently. Probably, and Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is probably the best among them. I think certainly the best among the recent sort of Western works. It's definitely a Western. Right? It's definitely could be put within that genre, although it's much more than that. I shouldn't. I certainly don't mean to suggest that it's merely a work of a genre fiction. It's definitely Western, though. Horses, lots of horses, and lots of guns. Right? It meets the requirements of the Western. Also, there's a novel. I would have to check the name, but the Sister Brothers DeWitt, I believe. Anyway, I'm a fan on Goodreads. Patrick DeWitt, I believe, is the name. That's quite a good Western as well. Right? That's a very good Western that's come out recently. And there was another one, I can't remember, but it's kind of interesting that the Western has become. There's been some really impressive books. I think probably the field's been neglected, or the genre. It's been neglected for a long time. It's been left. The field's been left fallow for a long time. Understandably, right? Probably overdone, and and very much right. A kind of an area really for a lot of times for juvenile fiction. So it's kind of surprising that you're finding a lot of well, not a lot, but you're finding some really impressive entries into the Western field. And as I said, McCarthy definitely be the best example of that. So that said, and so that is interesting. So I recommend you check out The Sister Brothers by DeWitt, and I'll mention in the other video another Western that I checked out recently. I just do not recall the name right now, but it was quite good. But to get into McCarthy, or to get into Blood Meridian in particular. The book's pretty. It's I guess in certain circles, it's pretty well known. It has quite a reputation. I guess it's pretty famous. It's probably it's been called. I've heard it called the bloodiest book since the Iliad. That's probably about right. It is quite bloody. Slaughter is definitely the order of the day. Right? It's an incredibly violent book. That said, it's very well written. The use of language, it's very powerful language, right? Very evocative, right? Very. I think whatever you think of the book, right? You have to give the author a lot of credit. You have to give McCarthy a lot of credit. It's a very strong attempt to master language. It's a very strong attempt to use language effectively, and in a lot of ways, it's worth reading. Just for that. Now, I suspect it's very much a kind of love it or hate it sort of book, which puts me in sort of an odd position. I'm not really sure I love it or hate it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't love it or hate it. Although I would probably fall down more on the side of feeling some affection for the book. I mean, I've read it twice, so I certainly don't loathe it. I certainly don't loathe it. I think it's well worth a read. It's tough, right? It's going to be a hard slog, which in itself is kind of a fascinating thing. I remember I showed my wife, or I read my wife, a passage from it, and it's a passage in which there's a very detailed description of the rifle and of a rifle that's carried by one of the members of the gang, one of the characters in the book. There's a description of the rifle that he carries, the sheath, the saddle, right, the gear, right, very detailed. Getting into this, and yeah, I mean it's in some ways it's that kind of book. But let me and that's. I mean, some people are going to be left quite cold by that. Others, like me, I have to admit, are really going to adore that. But let me say something about the general sort of structure of the book. It's a Western. It's overwhelmingly concerned with violence. It's concerned with the activities, I believe, of the of the Glanton gang, right? So it's a gang, criminal gang, and I suppose it's easiest to say the West, or the American West. Sometimes they seem to be operating with authorities. At one point, I believe they're killing Apaches, if I recall correctly. They're killing Apaches at the behest or in service of the Mexican government, and then I think things all go very wrong, or they simply give that up for criminal activity. These are decidedly unsavory, really awful characters in a lot of ways. And then when I say slaughter is the order of the day, I mean it quite seriously. You learn very quickly you just can't get emotionally involved with any characters or with anyone who comes on the scene in the books, because if you do, that person's dead in a moment, right? That person's gone. I think at one point they've slaughtered Apaches, and there's an Apache child they kind of take along almost as a mascot, and the child is subsequently killed right off very, very quickly. So if you're not going to want to form really an attachment to these characters, everything ends badly for pretty much everyone. The main character in the book, the protagonist, as it were, is simply referred to as the kid. The antagonist, or I suppose the opposite for the kid, although I'm not really sure that's accurate, is a character called the judge. Right? He's very kind of archetypal. Right? They don't really have, it's just the judge or the kid. In some ways very kind of, I guess, very sort of archetypal. It works, right? It works within the context of the novel. It's not particularly, it doesn't come across as hokey. It comes across, I think it's pretty effective. Mainly we're taken up with the protagonist. We follow his activity. We follow him to his involvement in the Glanton gang, and ultimately his involvement with the gang, or their activities, and the heroes, or the protagonist at least, his ultimate demise, his ultimate death. He's ultimately killed by the judge. The judge is also a member of the gang at the end of the book. I should say the judge seems to be a kind of war god. The judge seems to be a personification, a manifestation, a deity of war, engaged in this kind of endless combat. And although it's ambiguous, I mean, he kills the kid, right? He kills the kid at the end because the kid appears to have the judge seems convinced that the kid harbored some kind of mercy, some kind of sympathy for the enemy, I suppose the Apaches, in his heart somewhere. But at any rate, I should also add there's a very interesting and deeply ambiguous, not entirely clear. There's an epilogue with this sort of strange figure making his way across the plains. I'll let you read it for yourself. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but it kind of, I think you could interpret it that in the epilogue there's some kind of competitor deity, right? There's some kind of other god appearing, perhaps to a challenge to the judge, a challenge to the war god of the novel. But there you have it. So in terms of plot, there's not a lot, right? There's far too much slaughter for there to really be much of a plot. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. Wonderful descriptions of nature here, wonderful descriptions of landscape. It's very evocative, the land, as you proceed through the novel. The nature seems increasingly hostile, nature seems increasingly, the landscape seems to become increasingly hostile, seems increasingly to turn against the characters. The world seems not just a bleak place, but actively out to get, actively out, actively, I shouldn't say actively, but increasingly hostile to the characters. I think if there's a thesis, or if there's an argument to the book, I suspect, or at least I think it's plausible, to say that one of the arguments of the book is that war is the natural state of man. It's a very it's Hobbesian, right? Thomas Hobbes. Life is short, nasty. Life is short, nasty, and brutish. Life is violent in the absence of Hobbes. Life is violent in the absence of government, in the absence of structures, in the absence of a kind of overwhelming sovereign, some kind of overwhelming fearsome power that can subdue everyone to its will. Blood Meridian really takes that to heart, right? The natural state of man, very much. The slaughter, the natural state of man, is killing. We see this immediately with the kid. Right? He, I think within the first few pages that were introduced to him, the line is that he already had a taste for senseless violence, and the violence is pretty senseless. I mean, the violence, a lot of the violence that the kid and the others engage in, right? It's not really netting them gains, or it's not really productive. It's not really conducive. I think it's only very marginally in the service of anything. Now, I think it does raise some interesting problems for the novel. In some ways, it's an interesting thesis that the natural state of man is violence, and the natural state of man is this kind of constant warfare of all against all. McCarthy's certainly not the only one to think that, certainly not the only one to advance that notion. The question, after several hundred pages, though, if that's the overriding theme, and there's no competitor, or there's no alternatives presented, it can. I mean, I think maybe it's one of the flaws of the book. Right? I think maybe it's one of the flaws, but there's not really a conflict set up between this one ideology on the one hand, that the natural state of man is violent and the slaughter of one another, and that the world is merely a slaughter bench, merely a charnel house. Without something on the other side, I mean, I think it presents some problems for the novel. Now, the novel, right, the writing of the novel compensates for that in other ways. I mean, there perhaps are ways it makes up for it. But I think it maybe is an interesting problem with the novel. All right, so that is part one. I will get to part two later today. Like and subscribe, right? Do it. Much appreciated. All right. Peace out. I gotta go take ornaments off the Christmas tree and put them away. All right. See ya.